Your Steve Jones Show podcast is loading now. The Steve Jones Show podcast is sponsored by Sunbury Motors, North 4th Street in Sunbury, and Sunbury Motors Kia, routes 11 and 15 in Hummel's Wharf. Sports talk where your voice counts. This is the Steve Jones Show on News Radio 1070 WKOK. Now, from the Sunbury Motors studio, here's Steve Jones.
Sunbury Motors, 4th Street in Sunbury. Sunbury Motors Kia, routes 11 and 15 in Hummel's Wharf. We'll get to the play-by-play call of the day in a moment. But to me, this is not, in my opinion, a good day for college football. It is announced today that Miami quarterback Tate Martell is eligible to play immediately after the NCAA approved his waiver request. I'm sorry, but now we might as well just say it. We have full-blown college football free agency. There is no way on the planet that he has anything that could be construed as a waiver other than I need to get away so I have a chance to play someplace else. There's no grievance here. What's a grievance? What is his grievance with leaving Ohio State? The fact they brought in Justin Fields to compete against him? His position coach became his head coach. He has 3 years of eligibility remaining. But this was the one I've been waiting to see. The other one's okay. You can come up with whatever. But when I see somebody who has no other reason to transfer except he doesn't want to face the competition and is granted immediate eligibility to play, that to me tells me they might as well do away with the rule. You might as well do away with it. Because Tate Martell, there is no excuse, in my opinion, on the planet, under the current rules, that would make him eligible to play right away at Miami, other than the fact that he looked at the competition and said, I really don't have the guts to compete. So it comes down to, he didn't have the guts to compete against him. So, in other words, I'm going to quit, which he did, and then he went to Miami. And the NCAA said, yep, we're good with that. This is, of all the ones we've seen, and you know I've mentioned this a couple of times on the show, I'm waiting to see what they do with Tate Martell. That will tell us the direction the NCAA is going in. They gave him eligibility right away. Sorry, he transferred. He should have sat a year. Because the only reason he transferred was he's trying to somehow get himself into a better position to start. When he, one day I'm going to compete with this guy. Next day I'm gone. Then he gets his petition, and the NCAA lets him do it. Sorry. I realize that we've got to think modern all the time and so forth. I'm sick of all this thinking modern all the time stuff. I really am. This is the way the modern system is. Well, it doesn't mean it's the right system. Also, I mean, I don't know. There are many jobs out there, many jobs, that do have non-compete clauses. Where if you want to go someplace, you've got to sit out 6 months, got to sit out 9 months, got to sit out a year. Media, a lot of media is like that. You'll see a media personality on the air. They switch stations, but you don't see them for 6 to 9 months. I mean, so in my business, our business is very much like that. Happens all the time. So this is not unusual until this stuff starts happening. There is no way in his petition that he could possibly have an excuse for going there except I did not want to compete with Justin Fields, and I think I can win the job at Miami. That's the only reason he's going. And they let him get away with it. Nice. Well, now I think you feel like if anything happens, assistant coach leaves, the head coach. I mean, this is a case the head coach, his position coach, became the head coach. Where's the problem here? His head coach retired, but his position coach and his coordinator became the head coach. Where's the issue? It's like they're afraid to say no. They are afraid to say no. Okay, let's get to the play-by-play call of the day.
DeRozan crosses over Thompson at the elbow right. Now to the left wing, Bellinelli for three. Bellissimo, +1. The foul is on Kevin Durant. It's number 5 on Durant. And Marco Bellinelli goes to the free throw line as the Spurs now lead by 8, 93-85.
And the Spurs beat the Warriors, who have slumped down the stretch. It's almost like the Warriors are bored right now. Sean?
Yeah, they're just waiting to turn.
I thought you'd become the Warriors. That was boring you. All right.
They just didn't seem themselves like last night. But it's like, they still got a month away to flip the switch.
2 weeks they've been like that.
Yeah.
I mean, when you're that good, you get bored. I mean, it's like when you get to Game 8 of the Shikellamy football season, you can tell someone's bored, right? Because they're just that good.
All right, cruise control. We're going downhill to the playoffs at that point, right?
Right. Well, when you feel like you peaked in August. All right. So.
His favorite month of the year. That's right.
Yeah, exactly.
That's right.
All right. Let's talk college basketball. I mean, is there anything about wrestling you want to add?
No, we're good. We're good till Thursday.
Yeah, that's what I thought. That's what I keep trying to tell you. Thursday. We'll get to it Thursday.
Actually, I've already taken a peek inside the PPG Paints Arena. They're going black matte, blue matte. They're going black, blue, black, blue, black, blue. So two colors going back and forth for 8 mats to start.
Should have been black and gold. All right.
Yeah, how about it? They've used different colors like before, green and red, but just black and blue mats this year.
It looks the Penguins Arena. Use black and gold.
Sure.
All right.
Black and yellow.
All right. Let's bring Ken Pomeroy, KenPom.com. Yes, I am a subscriber. Welcome, my friend.
Yeah, thanks for having me back on the show, guys. Appreciate it.
Okay. Obviously, for many years, in its time, the RPI was fine, but that time was probably 20, 25 years ago. What was to you, as someone who crunches numbers, what made the RPI eventually antiquated in your mind?
There are kind of a bunch of things, but the main thing was that it didn't, a couple of things. One, home and road weren't really accounted for very well. For many years, they wasn't accounted for at all. And then really, I think in the last 10 years, they tried to make an adjustment to account for that, but it didn't apply to strength of schedule. It was really weird how they did it. So when you were talking about a team's strength of schedule, it didn't consider where the games were played, which was odd. And then I guess the second thing is that they didn't even consider margin of victory, which I think if you're selecting teams, you want to not handle margin of victory. You want to look just at the team's resume. But as the RPI is basically not used specifically for selection, but as like an organizational tool to kind of grade the quality of wins. In that case, you want a ranking of team strength. Like that's ultimately what we evolved to this season was, you got credit for beating the 40th best team in the country. Whereas in the RPI, you weren't ranking who the best teams in the country were. You were ranking kind of like who had the best schedules, with some adjustment for how they did against that schedule. Mathematically, it was just messed up. It was, as you said, it was like great in 1981 when computers were limited, but now we can do better.
When you look at how the field was put together, what did you like about it, and what, based on your statistical knowledge, didn't quite jive with what you thought was correct?
Well, I think they did a really good job, first of all, with seeding.
Yes.
They weren't, and maybe that's just how the year worked out. I need to kind of go back and look at things, but there weren't teams that were like oddly seeded.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you look at kind of like the Vegas odds, and they kind of line up pretty much with the seeds this year, which is pretty rare. So kudos for that. I think as far as the selection goes, like they did mainly a good job with the tools they have. I think we can still take another step forward and in the tools used in terms of evaluating a team's full resume. I think the biggest disappointment for me was St. John's getting in.
What's the first thing I said? What's the first thing I said the other day? That's the one team I looked at and said, do not belong.
Yeah, the Big East wasn't that great this year. So, first of all, go sub 500 in the Big East and still get in is, like, stunning. But what kind of bugs me about their situation, they didn't play a strong non-conference schedule. They, went 8-10 or whatever in the Big East. And Villanova and Marquette were, in the net rating, they were ranked like 26th and 28th, which St. John, by virtue of beating both those teams at home, got credit for quad one wins. But those were like the very easiest quad one wins you could have had. And I feel like the committee just looked at quad one record and didn't necessarily consider within that group, how difficult the wins were. And, Villanova or Marquette had been 31st and 32nd. Like, St. John's, I think, has no shot of getting in. And that's really not how it should work. Like,
right.
There's always a difference between being ranked 28th and 32nd, really. Like, so, yeah, in my opinion, that was the one that I think, if we'd used almost any other objective system, like St. John's is not getting in.
Right, and I told that's in fact that's ironically when we talked about the field on Monday, the only one I brought up was St. John's that I said should not be in. All right, I want to get to the Michigan State situation. It's fine that there are two, all right, but I don't get why, as the 5th overall team in this bracket, which is what they are in the S curve, they're 5. Why they're in the same group with the number 1 overall seed. Look, we have airplanes today. You can move.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, obviously, the NCAA doesn't currently have a policy to balance the regions in that way. They're concerned about minimizing travel, and I believe that comes from the institutions themselves. Like, I believe that's been the message that they've sent, is that they don't want to travel far. In the end, I don't think it's a big deal just because, first of all, they won't meet until the Elite Eight. And,
right.
Whether you're Duke or Michigan State, like, your goal in the basketball world is to win a championship. And so, it's one thing if they have to meet, like, in the Sweet 16 or the second round or something. But if you're meeting in the Elite Eight, like, you're going to have to beat some great teams to win a national title. At least that's usually how it works. So the fact that they ended up in the same region doesn't really offend me. I do understand your point. In a perfect world, the brackets would be totally balanced, but yeah, this is not a perfect world. And I think the reason it's not, because the schools have requested that, and so it's if enough people like Tom Izzo complain about it, I guess there could be changes in the future.
Yeah, in the KenPom rankings at this hour, Virginia is the 1. I mean, the number 1 team overall. Statistically, what makes them that 1 spot as opposed to a Gonzaga and a Duke, which are the 2-3 right behind them?
Yeah, so, in a very simple sense, I'm looking at, scoring margin and adjusting that for the schedule.
Right.
So Virginia, even it's, just adjusted for pace as well. So, but, what's been phenomenal about Virginia is, they still play at that characteristically super low possession pace.
Yes.
But they were rarely challenged at all this year during the regular season. People are, seeing that Florida State result in the ACC tournament and kind of downgrading them, but that was the worst game of the year. Like, they didn't have any other bad games during the season. They were challenged once by NC State, game that went to overtime, but otherwise they obviously lost the 2 Duke games, but in their wins they weren't close. And so, the thing about Virginia this year is their offense is the best that Tony Bennett's ever had. Their offense ranked 2nd. Actually, their defense ranked 5th. Their defense is still great, but it's not like clearly the best in the country like it was last year. And that's really a profile that actually I think bodes well. You really don't see national titleists just get there solely with defense. Like, most national titleists are better offensively than defensively, and so it might make Tony Bennett not feel so great about the team because he takes so much pride in his defense, but really, this team is built to win a title. The pace is another matter, but certainly you just look at their offensive and defensive numbers, and they look really, really good.
No question. The NCAA, the only other criticism I'll have of the committee is this, and it just, and I don't understand why they did this. but I don't understand why you would put the student athletes at Minnesota and Louisville, right, in a position where they have to talk about Rick Pitino, Richard Pitino, and that matchup. That to me was wrong, what they did. Why should Chris Mack have to talk about that? Why should Richard Pitino have to talk about his father? You can match a 7-10 up any way you want, right? You can pick somebody. That part I didn't get.
Yeah, my understanding is that they are pretty blind to those issues. Like, it's just so...
Well, they better wake up, because that's not good.
It's so complicated to put together a bracket with all the rules and restrictions they have that... they just don't have the time to like consider all these conflicts. Like there's another one where like Arizona State got to play Buffalo, and I realize there's no like controversy surrounding that matchup, but still, Bobby Hurley is going against his old team, which is kind of awkward.
Yeah.
But I think it's. I mean, in the matchup you're talking about, it's primarily. I feel like Richard Pitino is going to be the one fielding 90% of those questions. Like the players and Chris Mack are not necessarily, they might get a question or two, but they're not really directly involved in that situation like Richard Pitino is. Sure,
exactly. I agree with you on that part. He is going to be the one that's going to have to get up and have to really talk about it, because you're going to be asked about it. NC State was critical of what happened. I think they are 33 in yours. I want to say they're 33 in the net as well. Does NC State have an argument?
Well, there's two answers to that. I mean, one, they famously played the worst non-conference schedule in the country, and typically that is almost disqualifying. When you're a bubble team, it basically has been disqualifying in the past.
Right.
I do think I think in a perfect world they would get in, like what they did in ACC play. Basically the way to think about this is like, how would another bubble team have done against NC State's schedule? Would they have been able to do better? And I think NC State would have done better than most bubble teams against that schedule. So that's how I'd approach it. The other thing is, we talk about St. John's. I mean, their non-conference schedule is awful as well. So if you're going to put a team in that has an awful non-conference schedule, I would put the team that is more accomplished, that had a better record in a better league, and that would be NC State. So on the one hand, I don't feel terribly sorry for them, but I do feel like, the fair situation would have had them in, certainly over St. John's.
Ken, Dick Vitale's the one that every year will come out and say, oh, the little guy. I'll talk about the mid-major especially getting in. When you and I both know that this tournament is populated with a lot of little guys. Okay, we're going to watch two of them play tonight. In fact, we're going to watch three of them play tonight because Belmont's a mid-major. How do you feel about that, like the Lipscombs of the world and so forth, as to where that stands?
I think we can do better, again, just in terms of like how we evaluate overall resumes. I think just kind of labeling a team a mid-major or a power conference team, I think that kind of hurts the debate a little bit. Like I would just like to evaluate these teams on their overall accomplishment. Like you also get into the issue like Temple's playing tonight. Is Temple like, what are they? They're not really in a power conference, but are they cool being called a mid-major? Like, I know Cincinnati wouldn't be cool being called a mid-major. So
right,
that's part of the problem with the labeling. But, so to get back to your point, UNC Greensboro, they go, I think, 29-6 against their schedule.
Right.
Don't have, like, a whole bunch of quality wins. But, again, if you take Arizona State or you take St. John's and you play them against UNC Greensboro's schedule, like, we have the tools now to get an idea of what we would expect them to do in those cases. And they probably wouldn't go, through that schedule only losing 6 games. And so I think that's the way to apply it. So whether you're talking about a team in the Southern Conference or the Pac-12, which was weak this year, or the Big Ten, which was super strong, like you can apply this method to all those teams and have a fair system based on total accomplishment instead of just looking at hey, what are this team's 3 best wins? What are their 3 worst losses? Because I will admit, like, that is something that's always going to hurt the UNC Greensboros of the world. Like, they're never going to have 3 great wins just because their schedule will not have more than 3 or 4 great teams on it.
And darn well I have to ask this question. In the top 69, your top 69, there's only one team under 500, and that is at number 40, Penn State. What made Penn State's metrics really good that kept them in that 40 range almost all season?
Yeah. I mean, they, certainly after that 0-10 starting conference play, they were dinged a little bit, but obviously got it going down the stretch. And I mean, part of it is playing in the conference they played in. The Big Ten, first of all, is really tough, and actually, no team in the country one team in the country played a more difficult conference schedule than Penn State. That was Maryland. Right. So, when you look at Penn State's conference schedule, like a team would roughly be rated about 30th if they went 500 against that schedule. Like, right. The team that's rated 30th would be expected to go 500 against that schedule. That's how good you would have had to have been to go 500, basically. So that's part of it. And part of it is they did play a pretty challenging non-conference schedule when you look back at it. They didn't have any easy games in non-conference play. And obviously, they got the win over Virginia Tech, which, in retrospect, I think at the time looked good, and in retrospect looked good as well. And they were competitive in their other games for the most part, and certainly competitive in their losses in Big Ten play. And when they did win, they tended to win big. So, sporting margin comes into play. So all of those factors came together. And, it was obviously, I think people finally woke up, at the end of the season. It was like, we really don't want to play Penn State in the Big Ten tournament, even though their record isn't so good. They're obviously playing like a top 50 type team. And, it was nice to see. It's always nice to see teams with kind of out-of-place records and that are ranked high in my system kind of prove themselves at the end, like kind of justify that rating. So it was nice to see from that standpoint.
Yeah, it's interesting because at the end of the Minnesota game, I pointed out to people, I said for Minnesota it was a huge win because Penn State was a quad one win. Okay, right. They were in the top 50 in the net on a neutral court, right? And it's like, oh, that can't be. It's like, know the rules.
Yeah. I mean, that was kind of the beauty of the net this year too. That's in the RPI. It wouldn't have been a quad one win, but
right. That's exactly right.
Yeah. The net kind of was able to see through some of those things and analyze it, much better than the RPI did in the past.
Can I ask you one final question? Is what the net does, are they transparent enough with that? Because obviously what you do is transparent. I can click on whatever I want here. Of course, I'm a subscriber. But as to what everything means and why, are they transparent enough as to what net actually means?
No. I mean, they're clearly not. That was, I do love the fact they changed, they got past the RPI and got to the net, even if it's still imperfect. But that is the one thing that I really was disappointed in the NCAA on, is that they did not, publish previous seasons' ratings. And furthermore, like even this season, the tools that you have to kind of, look on their website at the net, like it just wasn't updated frequently. The strength of schedule was really never posted in an easy to access way. Like, yeah, there are a lot of issues with that I think they really need to iron out this offseason. It'll really, I think, help, just relate us to the general public. When you can see the past 10 years of data, like you can get a much better feel for how the system works. Like you don't have to release the formula. You don't need to do that. I realize it's really complicated. Yeah. But, if you can see past results, you can get a feel for how it works.
Right, exactly. Ken, always a pleasure. As you know, Dick Girardi and I reference you many times on the broadcast, so we appreciate all the help that you actually give us, because I think it makes our work easier and more enjoyable.
Appreciate you having me on, Steve, and thanks for all the support.
Ken Pomeroy, KenPom.com. Final half hour coming up. Neal Coolong in the house on News Radio 1070 WKOK. When it comes to car buying, there's the other guy's way, and then there's the SMC way. The other guys force you into a vehicle you really don't want. The Sunbury Motors way lets you take the time you need to browse, ask questions, and take the test drive and think on it. For over 100 years, the Mertz family and all their employees have made your experience the most pleasant one you'll ever have. The other guys won't offer you the best price for your trade, no matter how much they say they will. The SMC way is their promise to provide you with the most money the market shows your vehicle is worth. The SMC way is to offer you all applicable factory rebates on new vehicles and generous discounts. Looking for a pre-owned vehicle? The SMC way checks each vehicle with a 200-mile radius to determine the lowest price, then beat it. It's the lowest price promise, just part of the SMC way. The choice is up to you, the other guy's way or the SMC way. The SMC way wins every time. Sunbury Motors Company in the North 4th Street Auto Plaza, Sunbury, and at sunburymotors.com. Selling more cars and satisfying more customers for over 100 years.
Taking your calls at 800-795-9565. This is The Steve Jones Show on News Radio 1070 WKOK. Now, from the Sunbury Motors Studio, here's Steve Jones.
Sunbury Motors, 4th Street in Sunbury. Sunbury Motors, Kia routes 11 and 15 in Hummel's Wharf. Bad day for college football. Tate Martell granted immediate eligibility at Miami, transferring from Ohio State. He should have sat out a year. Okay? There's nothing in that paperwork. There's no way in the plan that he should have been eligible. The sport dramatically changed today with that. Now I think anybody can go anywhere they want, whenever they want. We don't want Neal Coolong going anywhere, just staying with us. Hello, Neal.
Probably not even before then. North Dakota State hasn't made the tournament in a couple of years. I'm not sure what channel it was on that night back, and I think, 2015?
Yes.
Gonzaga beat them by like 30. I'm not sure what channel that was on, but yeah. I watched it then. I will have to find it. I know that how often I flip through the cable package I'm paying for.
There exactly right. I mean, the cable package, if you have to take out a loan to take care of it, maybe it's overpriced. All right. Maybe.
Exactly right.
All right. Let's. The Steelers, Tom Bradley was obviously here today, and he wanted to take a look at, obviously, at the DBs here. Would you be surprised if the Steelers go through this draft and at least not select one?
I think if we group them together as defensive backs, I would say yes. I think it's odd a team wouldn't bring in at least one somewhere. Those are typically core special teams guys. You always need depth. There are a lot of positions, a lot of different ways that teams are using defensive backs nowadays. With that, generally speaking, I would think they'd bring in one somewhere. That said, I don't think cornerback is as much a priority as it has been the last couple of years. I mean, the signing of Steven Nelson, I think, really opens up some things for them in terms of the draft. Just because, it's weird to say, but they have a fairly solid nucleus of cornerbacks outside and in. You're looking at Joe Hayden, who's still got another year in his contract. Extension isn't out of the question at this point. Nelson signed a 3-year deal. Mike Hilton is coming up on free agency, though, at some point. For now, and maybe for 2 years, you've got something of a solid group of 3 cornerbacks that can play, or shown they can play in the NFL. From there, you've got the greatest draft pick ever, Artie Burns, probably fighting for a roster spot along with a guy like Cam Sutton, and whatever else they might do within the draft, the development of undrafted free agents that they've had in camp in the past. They'll have options. I'm not entirely sure they want to bring another one in, but I also said last year they wouldn't have 2 safeties drafted. So you've always got to address special teams and future needs. So I wouldn't rule it out, but I definitely don't think it's going to be a priority, certainly not in the first 4 rounds that they have this year.
How do you see Mark Barron fitting?
I have no clue, and I think that's Mark Barron's. The reason Mark Barron has played for half the teams in the NFL now is because of that. You're not entirely sure who he is. He clearly has a mentality of an inside linebacker, not quite as big, I think, as you would like, but it's getting smaller and smaller in the back 7 nowadays. A guy like Barron, I think, it can show some justification playing inside against certain teams. I think he's a matchup type of guy. And when I say that, what I look at is the playoff game between the Chargers and the Ravens last year. If you look at what Gus Bradley did with the Chargers in positioning his defense to go up against a power-heavy Ravens front, they put a lot of small, fast guys on the field, and they just shot gaps everywhere. The Ravens, their interior line in particular, couldn't get to these blitzing safeties that were attacking downhill and just getting in running lanes, and they stuffed the run the entire day. I mean, Chargers were a fairly decent run defense, not a great one, but they shut Baltimore down exactly where they stood, largely because they just outmaneuvered them. They outquicked them to every spot, and I think a guy like Barron can give you some of that versatility if you're going to go into a very light, 6 should-be defensive back look. Not exactly a dime package, but enough to be able to cover, probably better than John Bostic if he can't attack downhill in the same way. But he gives you that versatility if they need a physical guy that will bang heads and get to a spot. It gives them, I think, a competitive piece to go up against a team like Baltimore that's going to run the ball down your throat and still be light enough to be able to handle tight ends down the seam, which is really Baltimore's offense. So I think in a lot of ways, Barron complements their defense in a matchup like that. And I think we're going to see more teams looking to exploit the personnel decisions a lot of teams have made lately and getting smaller in their secondary to combat 4 or 5 receiver sets that so many teams play.
Yeah, that was going to be my next point. My next line of questioning was about Mark Barron. I think has done a good job of keeping himself relevant in the league. I think you'd agree with that because obviously he's still playing. Because when he was at Alabama, they played Penn State, and I was not enamored with his cover skills watching tape or even seeing him in person. But I knew he'd be an NFL pick. But he's kept himself relevant. Has the changing of the league helped keep him relevant? Because now, I mean, essentially he's not really a hybrid because he's not big enough to be a linebacker, but he's that extra defensive back out there. You play out there all the time.
It's kind of funny because I think he is the more literal definition of the hybrid. When we talk about the hybrid, people think of this advanced, elite athletic player, whereas in reality, what it is, it's a combination of 2 positions, and he doesn't play either one of them exceptionally well.
Exactly.
The gamble that Tampa Bay took, taking him 8 overall, you'd think at least that they had something of a plan for him to develop. That never happened. He's bounced around the league in a bunch of places because he's a specialty player, and you're not exactly sure what the role for him is. It's going to depend on the defense and what they do with him, and a lot of it, I think anyway, is exactly what they tried to do with Morgan Burnett last year. And Burnett comes out after the season saying he doesn't really want to play that way anymore. So, okay, he's out, and you bring in Barron theoretically to be something of a step up over a John Bostic in coverage, but something of a step down against the run. So you look at specialty positions that you can put him in. The gamble is he good enough to justify having that roster spot despite not really being one of either position? I think it'll be real interesting to see what they do with them, but my guess is this is really the Steelers' ultimate plan to figure out a way to get 8 defensive backs on the field, with Barron being one of them, and guys standing up all over the field except for 3 of them that have their hands on the ground. That kind of seems to be what Mike Tomlin wants to do. I mean, they've put so much emphasis on the secondary and trying to find as deep a position unit as they can get. Barron adds to that. I think it gives them perhaps some insurance for some downs throughout the season to, as a linebacker, or at least a guy in the middle of the field that's going to kind of move around. I think it's a reasonable signing. I don't think they paid a whole lot for him,
right.
But top to bottom, you're not sure the role he's going to play, and I'm not sure it's not going to be one of those things where he's doing something in week 1 that's completely different to what he's doing in week 17.
To me, he's a jack of all trades and a master of none. I mean, that's how I look.
There's any other way to describe it. It really, that's him. That's been his career. He'll continue to do it. I mean, the Steelers only gave him a 2-year contract. Keep that in mind. What that means is we're going to give you some money up front. We're going to save some on our salary cap because we can dump it into next year and take a little bit of a dead money hit to get rid of you. It's essentially a 1-year deal with some flexibility of the team to get out of it after a year.
Right. Now that everybody has gone someplace else, where Le'Veon Bell flushed $14.5 million of his life down the drain, and Antonio Brown worked out his magic to get a better deal by quitting, have things settled down in the Berg?
It's really hard to top all that, isn't it? I mean,
yeah.
Anything's a step down. We're talking unprecedented moves within the NFL, not just within the Steelers organization. Neither of those things have really happened before, certainly not in this salary cap era.
Right.
So you have to think that things will kind of, die down a little bit. You're not sure if there really is anything left or anything else for anybody to say. But I do think it's interesting, by and large, you're not hearing much from any of the Steelers who are back there that's not generally optimistic, positive about their upcoming season. It's not even questionable in terms of a social setting. They're really just kind of saying, I'm excited for this, I'm going to go and do that.
Right.
It's a little bit different than what it's been when you're F5ing the key to see what Brown's going to tweet about next. You don't really have that anymore. And there's an eerie calm surrounding the team right now, heading into a draft that, to be honest, all signs to me kind of point to a move up. I really don't think they want to draft 10 guys. For the roster that they have, the guys that they have in place, not that having 10 selections is bad. I think they just might be a little bit more incentivized this year to try to move up from where they are. Because you're picking 20 overall, that's sort of no man's land. You might be able to get a better player if you slop together a couple third-round picks, which haven't been incredibly successful for you over the last couple of years anyway. I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, I think for me, I think a lot of it rests on Devin Bush. I think he's the type of player they would love to have. I also think it's going to be tough for him to get out of the top 10. But at the
I
same
agree with
time,
that. Yeah.
If come pick 11, he's on the board, I wouldn't be surprised if the Steelers try to make a move to get up and get him. I really think he fits a lot of what they want to do, and he's a player that they need. Without Ryan Shazier, they really need that future developing alpha dog of the defense, and I think he fits that bill in a lot of ways.
Bush, to me, is a lot like Ryan Shazier in terms of lateral movement, speed, quickness. But I always felt, even in college, Ryan Shazier had better cover skills than what I saw from Devin Bush. That's how I look at them in college.
A big part of that too is Shazier was so long.
Oh my goodness!
He was super lanky. He was like that 175-pound wrestler. Those guys all looked like super tall, really long limbs. That was Shazier. I mean, he was like a spider. He didn't hit guys with his shoulder. He just kind of wrapped them up and brought them to the ground. With that, you have a pretty significant inherent advantage in coverage. You're going to be able to cover a lot more ground and shrink that window down the seam much more than a guy with shorter limbs, shorter arms. Bush, he doesn't have the greatest size, and that certainly is an issue. That might be something compelling for a team. But at the same time, it's getting so hard to specialize and create enough sub-packages on defense. Speed is ultimately the one common denominator that you need among everything. Coverage, you can bracket coverage. A zone-based team like Pittsburgh, you can get away with that to some degree. At the same time, there are field-stretching tight ends that you might have to bring down to safety, too. To some degree, you're not going to be able to find a 6'5" defensive lineman who can turn and run with a guy like Rob Gronkowski in his prime. I mean, that's just the inherent advantage an offensive player, particularly a tight end, has. But if you get a guy that can keep up, play underneath him and make that window really tight up top, you've got another safety that's over the top that can either clean the guy's clock or take the ball away. So it's not so much his skill as it is his presence and his awareness. And when I see Bush play, and you've probably watched him way more than I have. When I see him play, I see a kid that really knows what to do on the field.
He sure does.
Obviously,
yes,
is extremely important for a linebacker. And I'll take 15 stellar plays against the run versus 130-yard completion, down the seam to a tight end a game. I'm okay with that. That's football today.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. I think that's exactly where he is. I have to ask about Le'Veon Bell. $14.5 million. I've always maintained he'll never get that money back. And to his credit, he signed a contract where, guess what? He's never going to get the money back.
It doesn't appear that'll be the case. Lots of people saying lots of different things in regards to his contract. What I said in this segment and in others, his deal is going to be unique. There are going to be things with his deal that we haven't really seen before. And the fact that the Jets gave him a guaranteed roster bonus for 2020, I think, qualifies. Doesn't really seem to be much of a point of giving a guy a roster bonus that's guaranteed after 5 days from when he signed the contract. That's the difference, I think, between the two deals. Ultimately, the numbers that I've seen, it appears Bell has more guaranteed money than what the Steelers are reported to have offered him. Right. But the price in which that Bell had to pay to get that makes it seem kind of nominal to me what that difference really is. And let's compare apples to apples. You can't say the $14.5 million is necessarily specifically on his tab, so to speak, because otherwise he would have signed the contract the Steelers gave him, and he'd be playing on that now. That's important because with the offer the Steelers would have given him, he's scheduled to hit free agency once more before he turns 30.
That's right.
With the deal he has with the Jets, he's on the back end of his career. And I know that seems odd that there is such a huge difference between 29 and 30 in the NFL, but there is. Adrian Peterson put up pretty good numbers last season. Mm-hmm. He got $8 million over 2 years.
Yes.
Why? Because he's 32 years old.
Right.
That's really what it comes down to. So Bell missed out on one last chance to score a larger deal in free agency. Not that he topped what he got from the Jets or he would have had with the Steelers, but there's a big difference between 3 years, $20 million, and 2 years, $8 million. He could have been able to tack on another one of those contracts, whereas then if he's still playing, he's in Adrian Peterson territory. He's not going to get more than $3-4 million a year on the back end of his deal. So I think ultimately, I've said this before, I don't believe players get better at football by not playing football. I don't care whether he has wear and tear on his body or not. If you're not used to that, if you're not used to the banging, if you're not used to the explosive movement that you have to play football, you have more of a risk of getting hurt in
Sure.
mini camp and training camp than you do on Sundays.
Right.
And statistically speaking, that is absolutely the case. And there are many of trainers that will suggest a big part of the reason of that is atrophy. They don't have enough conditioning to simulate what they have to go through on the field. If you just, great, you're not getting hit. I understand that. Your head is safe in that regard. But ask Des Bryant. Des Bryant practiced, 3 games with the Saints, or 3 practices with the Saints before he blew out his Achilles.
Right.
It's not a question of wear and tear. It's just a question of his body wasn't prepared for it. And he had been NFL inactive for 10 months. Bell's going to be well over a year by the time he gets on the field again. Right. To me, I think in the end, it's a wash. However, whatever dollars we want to move from one ledger to the other, however it is we want to define virtually guaranteed, practically guaranteed, expected to earn, all of that said, I think that all things considered, both of those deals were essentially the same.
Well,
to me, that's a loss to Bell.
I always do respect somebody, and we'll end it here, but I always do respect somebody that does bet on themselves. That they have enough confidence in themselves that they're willing to take a bet on themselves. And he did do that. Now, that part I will give him credit for. I mean, but in the end, $14.5 million is still $14.5 million. But
think of it this way: he very easily could have played for $14.5 million and then signed the same deal with the Jets this year. That's the part people don't really seem to want to discuss. Him sitting out a year didn't do anything for him, and statistically speaking, the odds of suffering a career-ending injury on the field, I know we saw that happen with Ryan Shazier, but the odds of that are extremely low. We saw Earl Thomas get significantly injured. We saw Earl Thomas throw a fit about it. We saw Earl Thomas protest a contract he signed, and look at the deal he just got with Baltimore. He didn't lose anything. No. If anything, he got most of last season off because he got hurt. Right. It benefited him to get injured in a lot of ways.
Right.
And people just make too much out of the injury thing, and it is prevalent. It does happen. The frequency of major injuries in the NFL is not nearly as prevalent as people think that it is. And most of them happen in minicamp and training camp, which Bell hasn't participated in I don't know how long. Just keep that in mind. When was the last time Bell went through a training camp?
I think he's driven. I think he's driven by it. So
maybe. He drove out there a ways. He's probably somewhere else. He's on his jet ski down in Miami. Overall, I worry about him in a health sense, not because I believe the reports that he's fat or anything like that. I don't think that's the case at all.
Right,
I just think that your joints, your limbs, your ligaments, they need to be conditioned to cut as explosively with as strong of a body that Le'Veon Bell has. It takes a lot to get ready for that. It takes a lot to simulate that. That's why you see so many ACL tears, Achilles ruptures, things like that in training camp. Guys aren't used to running and cutting at that speed. They need to be in camp. So I hope he's right. I don't want to see him get hurt. I hope he's ready for it. But that's really, to me, the gamble of injury, you never can avoid it. And Bell didn't avoid anything. He'll end up, maybe making a few million more dollars, and that's worth it to him. But he would have had it earlier. He would have had more opportunity to to get more money at the end of his career had he signed with Pittsburgh. So all things told, I agree with you. I'm glad he bet on himself in that sense. Yeah. I'm happy to see him get paid because I think he's a great player. And you know, bottom line, he's a good guy. I know people don't think that, but he's a good guy. I hope he does well, but I could totally see this not working out real well for him either.
Well, I'd like to keep going, Neal, but Mike Trout's holding on 4 and wants to discuss how to spend his money.
Tell him he spoils me that $20 million I lent him a while ago down in Cabo.
I'll bring that up. I'm sure he remembers it.
Oh, yeah. Oh, he better.
Neal, thanks.
Thanks, guys.